Um, then we have something which is kind of common is a loop. So that it's essentially a sequence of instructions that repeats until a condition is met. And so one iteration, which is like kind of like one time it goes through the loop, it'll ask a question, it'll do something, and then it'll end when no further action is needed. So the two loops that Matlab uses is for and while loops. Other languages have other loops. They're more specific for and while loops. Python has a for each loop, and then there's do while loops. So you'll experience that in other languages as well. And one thing with loops you have to make sure is that your condition is temporary. So what that means is you don't want to have a condition that's like always going to be true or always going to happen. Otherwise, you're going to have an infinite loop and you'll never exit like the loop. I think I'll explain a little bit more when we get into for loops and while loops. Two key statements that you can have within a loop are break and continue. So break will exit the loop before the condition is false. So maybe you're going through a matrix and you're trying to find a number, like let's say you're trying to find 3, and once you find 3, you don't want to continue looking through the matrix. So then you can put a break statement in the middle. Continue just skips the statement within the loop, but the loop still goes. So if you have like an if statement and you say if the number is 3, then it'll say continue. It'll skip looking through the if statement, but it'll still go through the loop. So those are the two key distinctions. So now getting a little bit more specific, the first loop we're going to talk about is a for loop. And how to think about this is kind of like for a number in some range of values. So you have like 4, C, and 1 to 3, display C, and then N. So what this is the C is a loop counter. So every time you go through the loop, it'll start at some number, increment, and then end. So it's the same range that we use for creating matrices as we talked about last time. So you have like your starting number, your ending number, and if something was in the middle, that'd be your increment. So I can just show you kind of how every time C gets redefined, every time you go through the loop. So let's say for C equals 1 to 3, I'm going to display C. I'm going to end. So I make sure that I end, and that end corresponds with the for loop. So as you can see, every time it goes through, every time it makes an iteration, it first starts at 1, next time it goes to 2, and next time it goes to 3. So just make sure you understand that every time it goes through the loop, it's redoing what it did before, but with a higher incrementation. So a couple of things that this is used for is most commonly it's used to kind of iterate over a matrix. So you can get all the elements out in the matrix. Usually for that, you'll do from our 4 C equals 1 to length of the matrix. So what that will do is that'll get you to the bounds of the elements of the array. Or you could repeat a computation like X many times. It's one of the most common loops used in programming. While loops aren't used as often, but for loops are used more. And a special case for Matlab is you don't need to define the loop counter outside of the loop. So you don't need to say like C, you don't need to initialize C as C equals to 0. So then it knows what to reference. It's already like created within the for loop. So next is while loops. So think like while this condition is true, then I'm going to do some statement. And one key thing to think of, one key thing in while loops is you have to make sure you're like incrementing your variables. So if you look at in for loops, when you do this range, it already increments or decrements your variable, your loop counter. But while loops, it doesn't. So make sure you always do that within your loop. So then you don't have any infinite loops. And it can be written like from a for loop, and you have to initialize your index outside of the loop. So how I kind of like use an example for a while loop is like, while there are Cheerios in a bowl, eat a Cheerio. So then once you have no more Cheerios, you're done and you don't do anything else. So like to demonstrate that, I'm going to define, let's say we have 10 Cheerios in the bowl, right? And I'm going to say while Cheerios are greater than 0, I'm going to take one Cheerio out. So this is like me like decrementing my loop variable, my loop counter. So I'm going to take one out. And then I'm going to end the loop. So what this is going to do is you can see that, so I started with 10 Cheerios. First time I go, then I'm subtracting. I have 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, all the way down to 0. And then it goes through the loop and checks, okay, Cheerios is 0. Is that greater than 0? No, I'm done. I'm going to hit this end statement and I'm going to exit the loop. So every time it's going, it's checking, okay, so the first value is 10, 10 is greater than 0, gonna execute this. 9 is still greater than 0, keep going all the way down to 0.